before we go into your journey, I actually want to talk about fear and doubt. I know you've been very open about that early on when you were starting your business. And I think that is so relatable. I even had that before I started. You're so vulnerable in those early days. So I'm curious, if someone's listening in today, what would you say would be maybe one or two practical steps that they can take to start overcoming that fear and that doubt that creeps in?
I would say the first step is acknowledging what the thing is that you ascribe so much fear to. Because oftentimes when we break down what is the thing that's holding us back, we realize that if that greatest fear came true, we would still be okay. And so one of the practices I did very, very early on was write down the doubts, write down the fears so I could look at them. And what I surprised myself with was just how okay I was with that fear being actualized. So whether that was failing or whether that was starting Soto and sharing it with thousands and then having a demise, could I handle that? And everything kept pointing back to the fact that I could manage every downside scenario I felt very comfortable with. So there's something about fear being so esoteric that when you can put it on paper, it just makes it less scary. And I still do that exercise to this day. I will oftentimes, when I feel like I'm sitting with a lot of stress, I take a second and then I really break down what is stressing me out right now. I write it all down. I look at everything. I prioritize what really needs my attention. And all of a sudden that feeling of being overwhelmed is quickly dispelled with feeling in control, but it requires some action to arrive at that solution. And many times it's just putting thoughts down on paper.
Gosh, it sounds so simple, but I will say that has also helped me. I feel like we have those days of you just feel like all the pressure of your personal life, your professional life, your job, like everything. And it could feel so like jumbled in your brain. But to your point, writing it down and getting it on paper is actually life-changing. It sounds so simple, but like getting it out of your brain has been so helpful for me too. So it's very cool to see that you had that practice, that journal prompt of just thinking about the worst case scenario and realizing, you know what, I'm actually going to be okay. And it never gets to that point, but it's a good exercise to kind of go through because your nervous system realizes like, oh, everything is okay. So I love that. I love that. So, I mean, there's so many questions I want to dig into, and I'm going to fast forward a little bit, Hilary, but I want to talk about your life after college. I know you were at Goldman Sachs for over 6 years, which, you know, coming from the world of finance, that's a lot of time. And I know you even spent more time in finance. I feel like people go for 2 years, they leave, they do their thing. And you were there for a good amount of time. So a few questions I have are, what drew you into that space of finance? And what would you maybe say were some of the biggest lessons or skills that came out of that?
What drew me initially to finance was the caliber of person that worked there. And while I didn't necessarily see myself in that type of role for eternity, I did know that I could never have dreamed of a better teaching ground for leadership qualities, nimbleness, awareness, and the trading floor represents a very unique ecosystem of all of those things and managing different personality types while also weaving in the high stress nature of trading in general. And when you're young and you're learning through osmosis, you want to take in as many different leadership quality styles as possible. And so on a trading floor, there's 300 people. So that's 300 people you get to learn from. And that was very unique. And it really was yours to do what you wanted with it. So when I think about Goldman in general, they had a remarkable way of encouraging you to meet everyone. And it was through the shadowing program where you would literally grab a stool, you would sit behind someone, you'd watch them do their job, you'd ask questions, you would sometimes sit in silence. But that push-pull between knowing how to interact with new people while also ascribing a new skill set. And your next question was, what did I take away from it? It really was self-awareness and being a shapeshifter to different environments so that I could learn as much as possible while also being well liked by the community of people I was surrounded by. And I think a lot of times I thought that my personality was like a one size fits all. And if you hated it, we were never going to connect. And if you loved it, you were my people. there's varying degrees of your personality that you can bring to any relationship. And I learned how to dial it up and dial it down depending on who I was interacting with.
I love that. And I wasn't in sales and trading, but that is intense. Like I remember going on the floor visiting friends. I'm like, woo, there's a lot of energy in this room. It's super fast paced. So what an interesting place to be in. And I wouldn't think that you would say self-awareness was one of the biggest, I guess, skill sets that you kind of had, which I know in life and entrepreneurship, that's so key. But I know in another interview, you said that as well, and this might be part of the self-awareness, is the feedback that you would get from Goldman. And I know how cutthroat it is. I'm like, there's no joking around over there. Maybe you can kind of share a bit more of that. And is there any feedback that you got that was really an aha moment for you in that process?
As it pertains to feedback, I think you always have to be very mindful of feedback versus advice. Advice is going to be a moment where you're coming to someone seeking guidance on a situation. And you want to be in communication with someone who really understands you when you're going through that, because advice has to be very specific for a person. The advice that someone would give me for how to succeed at Goldman would be a very different piece of advice that you would give a counterpart of mine who had an engineering background. Feedback is different. So feedback, you always have to remember that Goldman or any corporate environment, you're a sum of your parts. So everyone needs to be adding value in their own way. And so feedback is intended to make sure that everyone's working together in a way that's going to add the most value. And when I initially received my first pieces of feedback, and a lot of it was in relation to algorithmic trading, understanding how that works, it was really getting into the minutia of the business itself. I was afraid to dive into that piece of it and learn all the things that it required me to be an expert in that area. And like anyone, talk about doubt, like I doubted myself and my intelligence. So there was already this friction that I felt with trying harder, because it just felt like an inevitable failure if I tried even harder in that space. What I learned was you're only going to give feedback that to someone who you think can actually rise to the occasion. So when my boss would tell me that I fucking suck at something, he actually meant that you could be better. It wasn't that I was going to be terrible for forever, but he felt like he could tell me that I was very bad at what I was currently doing because there was a runway to improvement. So I think a lot of times you're just going to hear the negative, but no one's going to waste their energy uncovering your blind spots if they don't think you can do something with it. So there was a couple of moments that really stuck out in my first 6 months where a combination of like being in a real-time trading scenario, the person I'm working with yelling out, Hilary, that was not the right decision. That was not the right move. And by the way, those words being exchanged in front of 30 people. So this is not feedback that's given in silo. But then there were other moments where I was taken into a conference room. I was sat down. We were in discussion and examples were given as to where I could improve. And I would tell anyone that is in that moment, if someone is giving you feedback, ask for examples, because it's really hard if someone says, oh, you don't understand anything about X, Y, and Z. I need you to do better. Your next question should be, okay, noted, understood. Can you please tell me of a time where I didn't show up in the way that I should have? And so now what ends up happening is you can start to pinpoint in place where you need to be better, where you need to be a better listener, or you need to be a more active contributor. And I give my bosses credit that they were able to actually give me real examples so that when I found myself in that situation again, I had a higher likelihood of implementing the feedback I was given to arrive at a better scenario and outcome than I had otherwise encountered up until that point where I didn't know how I could be better.
I love that. And I think even for starting or having your own business, like my friends always remind me who have their own companies, are like, clarity is kind. Like,
oh, totally.
Detail. Like, I love what you're saying, the detail, the feedback. That's actually just a good reminder for me as well, is that is helpful for someone to take, because sometimes if it's too high level, you're like, well, how do I do better? And they're not aware of like what is maybe specific that you're talking about. So I love that. And I think that's just good feedback for anyone, again, who's in a role, whatever, corporate, startup, as a manager, as a founder, like relatable for so many different things. And, it seems like your time in New York and in finance, you really enjoyed it, right? It felt like you enjoyed being around all these smart people. And I know you ended up moving to LA, which has a very different, I guess, finance vibe. It's very different out here. And my question is, you did so well, you built this career for so many years. What was a turning point for you to be like, you know what, it's actually not for me, or I'm ready to kind of go off on my own? I'd love to hear about that turning point a little bit.
So after Goldman, I ended up doing one last longer term role within finance. And so I left the world of public markets and I went into real estate, where I was working in an IR function at a debt fund. And I think a lot of times we discredit the fact that you spend 6 years at Goldman or 7 years at Goldman or another like-minded institution, because there is a pathway to promotion and pay that can be very meaningful. And while I didn't think that finance was forever, I owed it to myself to see what could I do with this experience and this career and leverage it for one more promotion and pay moment. And I was able to do that. I found myself in a seat that I thought was going to be the right one for me. It ended up not being it, but I really do. I'm grateful for that opportunity, because I got to then distinguish between working in a very tough environment versus one that was quite toxic. And tough for me was, as I mentioned, hearing that you're bad at your job, hearing that you can be better. You can say that that's toxic. I don't think it is. I think that that's actually an environment that wants to see you succeed, and they're actually giving you the tools to do that. So the difference is when you go from tough, which is an environment that encourages growth and change, to another environment where there's a ceiling put on you and there's no way to break through it, and the characteristics of the company aren't based on the things that you value, such as integrity and open communication lines, you can feel very stifled. And so for me, I found myself in the other category in the second stage of my career. But without that moment and really recognizing that I did not enjoy the subject matter, I was not feeling supported in my seat, it put me in a position where I had to make a lot of tough choices. And one of those choices was actually admitting to myself that this wasn't the right place for me. And Soto was not something that I felt like I had to build when I first left college. It's not even something I thought I was going to build 7 years out of college. But what ended up happening during this whole time was I just uncovered a blank space in the fitness world where I was unable to find a solution for what I needed. And Soto was my solution to that problem. But like most things, problems and solutions present themselves over the course of your life. You just have to be willing to witness them, see them, and then solve them. And then that's what Soto was for me. So that's why when I look back and a lot of people ask, why didn't you start this sooner? I couldn't have. There was no way I would have had the experience or the awareness to identify the market need for Soto if I hadn't been the consumer that needed it.
Exactly. And I appreciate you just kind of opening up about the difference between a tough environment when you were in New York and then moving to LA and feeling like the job you had was toxic. And, you know, you're not someone that's just going to quit, leave, you know, move that environment. I'm sure you were trying to work through it, figure it out. I mean, it's also tough to come to the decision that, all right, this is not the place for me. That takes time and layers to kind of work through. And you mentioned the idea of Soto kind of came because you were the consumer. So tell me more about how the idea lit up, because you didn't necessarily quit your job immediately, right? You were kind of working on it behind the scenes, which I think is important. I think that's a great way to start. So tell me more about the impetus and how you were rolling it out when you still had this quote unquote like toxic job at the time.
Great question. I think a lot of times people think that a side hustle means that you're giving it less time. A side hustle is still going to take 100% of your time and energy. It just means that you're going to have to manage giving two things 100% of your time and your energy. And if you're doing the math on that, you don't have 200% to give. So what it comes down to is how can you create equilibrium between the two areas of your life that need you so that you can show up in your best self, but also really get insular and figure out, is this a passion or is this a potential profession? And for me, Soto initially was something that I gravitated towards as a personal solution. I then started to see the market need for it after socializing it with friends. And during this time, I was still working at my other job. And so what it came down to was like, how do I reallocate my time so I can satisfy both of my responsibilities? That meant waking up earlier. That meant saying no to a lot of personal plans. That meant that the weekends were actually an opportunity for me to work, not necessarily have the date nights that I wanted and the fun afternoons that my friends wanted to have with me. And those are sacrifices and those are choices. But what ends up happening, especially with a side hustle, is you realize your willingness to make that choice is actually easy.
Yep.
And so I found it to be very easy to choose the hard thing week after week. And that started to like flex the muscle where like, I think I can actually do this full time, but I also needed money. And so I couldn't quit my job yet. And I think that's it's an answer that I think fewer people say out loud, even though it is the truth. And it's not that I don't think people want to say it out loud. I just think it's a fact that we oftentimes forget when it's all said and done and we're looking back on the last 3 years, we don't think, oh, I really needed the money at the time. Mm-hmm. And it's not, again, because it's not important, but other things take significance in your brain. But I just remember that we had rent to pay. My husband was starting his own his own company too. So we both had responsibility to each other to have as much savings as we could as we both entered this new territory of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And I so appreciate you being real about that, because I think it's a great way to start. And also, like you said, it gives you the opportunity to figure out, is it a passion or a real business? And I think quitting it and putting everything on the line, there's even more pressure. And you already have that pressure of building something. But if you have the stability of a full-time job or something there, I feel like it allows you to have a little bit more freedom and fun, despite the sacrifices, like you said, you did.
Totally. Nothing stifles creativity faster than needing to be paid. Yeah, and you also want to be receptive to feedback. Yeah. And especially when you're starting your own company, that feedback can look quite critical and you don't want to be defensive. And I think that I read a quote the other day that I absolutely love, which is, if you want to help someone, be honest with them. If you want to help yourself, just tell them what they want to hear. And a lot of times I'll have conversations with up and coming entrepreneurs who reach out asking for feedback on their product. I am never going to sugarcoat my response. I'm going to be as honest as I possibly can, because people did that with me and I'm very, very grateful for it. But what I can quickly tell in the course of a conversation with someone is they just want confirmation bias or they actually want the feedback. And when I can tell that someone just wants confirmation bias, unfortunately, I know I'm on a call that's wasting my time. Because then you're not getting anything out of this. You don't really want feedback. You just want to be told you're doing a good job. And that's okay. Words of affirmation are incredibly important along the journey of building anything. But you have to be honest with yourself with what you're seeking. And so sometimes when I'm on a call and I start to give the feedback with an individual who wants confirmation bias, the tone of the conversation changes and I actually know that I've just offended someone. And it's tough because when I started my product, I had a couple of conversations where people were brutal with me, that my user interface was clunky, that the structure of Soto, when it first started out, it wasn't 5 moves that we repeated twice. It was 10 unique moves. And I had friends and family say, this is too confusing. And I could have very much taken that personally, but instead I said, you know what? You're right. That is deeply confusing. And there's no muscle memory that we can build through 10 unique movements. So you're right. Let me take this back to the drawing board. Let me reconfigure it. And without that feedback, I don't know where Soto would have been. I'm glad that people didn't lie to me. So I try to pay that forward despite clearly upsetting individuals along the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough to hear, but yeah, I've noticed that too. I mean, even in our journey starting out, I thought it's funny. We actually had a beta product and we did a lot of our friends and cousins. And then I realized quickly, I'm like, oh, we actually need like other people that don't know us to be a little bit more real. So I learned that quite quickly. I'm like, oh, they're being really nice. Like, are you sure? Like, I'm like,
well said.
It's just interesting. Yeah.
No, and it's actually a really good point. I think you have to be very careful with who you're asking for with feedback. You need the crew that's your family and your friends and that love you and support you, because you want them to like your product. But then you got to push yourself and go one sphere out from it where they don't need your friendship.
Yeah, exactly.
And if someone doesn't need your friendship, then they're going to be really honest. And I think for me, there was a turning point with Soto where I remember teaching classes where it went from being all friends and family to all strangers. And I knew that was a great point for me. It was like, perfect. I have people in here that don't need my friendship and they're here because of the product. Love that.
Yeah, that's a big that's a big aha moment when you're like, oh, the first sale or someone comes to your class who's not like a friend or somewhat. That's like
it's very encouraging.
100%. And, you mentioned that you built the business because you were the consumer. Tell me more about, and you also had so much feedback from others, but you were very scrappy early on. And can you kind of walk us through like, what did that look like? I know you built it from your garage, and how were you slowly creating that awareness? Because then it kind of, eventually led to you leaving and doing it full time. So I'd love to talk about those earlier days.
Right. When I was first starting Soto, I knew exactly how much money I needed to get started. It was a combination of funds set aside for the back end software for the very scrappy digital product that I was building. I needed equipment. I needed paint. And that was actually it. And when you think about Instagram as a social media engine, it's a free engine if you use it to your advantage. So I knew I had that. And I also had realistic check-ins with myself. So every 6 months I had to see how much had I spent, how much had I made? Is this working towards something that's sustainable? And so for the first year, the goal was simple: prove product market fit. With my savings, I contributed a lot to my life with my husband. I probably put in 5K, 7K in the beginning towards all the things I just mentioned. And then recurring revenue from the app would come in. I would reinvest. Everything was reinvesting. And it took a longer period of time to get to where I am right now because of that model. But I've always felt very encouraged with the risk I was taking because I had the demand to prove the next step. I didn't just release something that required a huge investment where I was crossing my fingers saying, like, I hope people like it. But I'm also very fortunate that the product I was bringing to market was something that just required my time. When you think of these SaaS businesses, when you think of a consumer business where it's actually a physical good, they don't necessarily have that luxury. You actually need to raise, or you need to really self-fund in a very meaningful way in order to share your product. So you do have to take a lot of upfront risk without knowing if the consumer is going to love it. And I'm sure that within those own businesses, they're doing everything they can to make sure that when they do that and make that choice, they feel good about what they're bringing to the world. But I had the luxury of it being energy. That's what Soto is. Granted, there's a roadmap behind it. There's logic and a method behind the moves, but you can't trademark a squat. You are just reconfiguring it into a way that feels digestible to an end person that wants to do that squat jump. And so my energy and time was my commodity, and I had to place a high value on it. So knowing your value going into going into a service industry was really important for me. And I'm glad that I stuck to that.
Yeah. And I love the thoughtfulness around, like, all right, the first year is product market fit. You're going to check in with yourself, like having a general loose structure. Cause some people are always like, do you have a business plan for 5 years? I'm like, dude, like every 6 months, a year, things are changing and pivoting, especially when you're nimble and like self-funded and you're constantly learning and pivoting. And I'm curious, did you always know that you wanted to do this app, like recorded sessions, or did the idea start in a very different way and you pivoted? Like, what did that look like?
So initially, Soto was Zoom classes. So it started off as an email chain of everyone that wanted to do it. Every Monday, I would send out a schedule and I would say, these are the times that I'm doing it. Can't wait to see you join. And eventually people start saying, I can't make this time, but can you record it? And so I would record the Zoom sessions, and Zoom makes it very easy to do that. And then I could release a link that people could replay on their own time. And for me, that aha moment was, I don't want to do lives. I don't want to teach live digitally. I just want an on-demand library, because people want to take these classes on their own time, within their own schedule, and they don't want to have to reconfigure their plans to do something in their living room. So that was probably the first real piece of information that I gained from the initial idea of Soto, which informed the way I wanted to build the digital platform. And then in the other ways it shape-shifted, I always knew I wanted omnichannel. I wanted in-person classes and a digital product. And this was all happening during COVID. And I felt very strongly that there would be a return to in-person at some point.
Sure.
And I didn't think it was going to be 100%, but I knew that this world of like hybrid working out would be top of mind to most people. And I was very committed to building that from the very, very beginning. So that meant pairing my digital classes with in-person opportunities, even if one person was coming to them, but doing pop-ups throughout the country. And creating an identity for a business starts really early on. And I'm glad that I did that from day one, because when I would offer an in-person class, I didn't feel outside of the brand. When I released a digital class on the app, it felt in line with the brand. So there was a lot of cohesion. So I never really had to redefine what Soto was as we've built and grown.
hmm And I want to underscore, something about how you even started it, because I meet so many people who are like, I have this idea. I want to spend all this money on an app and
Yeah.
create something. I'm like, have you tested it? Like, just start scrappy, like email. Like, so I want to just triple, double, like underscore how you started just so
Yes.
simply. You emailed people. You were like, oh, they want it. Let me record the Zoom. Like, that is huge. And a lot of people kind of miss that step. And it's like, why don't you just test it out exactly like you did before bringing on a developer or doing the app? Like, so I love that you were so nimble and
No,
that way.
and you make a great point. And I think a lot of times when you're starting anything new, you actually think you have to build everything from scratch.
Yeah.
What you soon learn is there are a lot of amazing companies that provide infrastructure for entrepreneurs that want to do what you're doing. So for me, it's crazy that you say that, because it's really an excellent point. I always thought, oh, I'm going to have to hire a team of engineers and
Yeah.
developers to create my app. Not the case. Once I started doing my research, all of the behemoths and a lot of the people that I deeply admired, they used a white label service to build their app. So therein lies one of the biggest solutions to my own problem, which is I don't have $1 million to develop my own app, but there's this incredible company that wants to partner with me, and I can create my app through them. Like with all things, there's always limitations when you're using a product like that. But I was able to eventually find Vimeo, and they became my white label service for my app. And that was in the second generation of what the app was. I used a different service for the beginning. It was good enough. I ended up switching to Vimeo when I was willing to make that investment and commitment. And they have been an exceptional partner. And we have grown together. They have treated me with so much respect and understanding. And they're thought leaders in the space, and they want to work with me with solutions. And very full circle moment, I got to speak at their offsite in New York City a few weeks ago. And we got to be kind of this success story with their team. And it really just came down to amazing communication and the fact that what they're so exceptional at is letting you be the hero of your own product. And they don't try to be flashy with Vimeo. They really let you be the star. And I have so much respect and I really have a lot of deference for them, because they've really redefined how it is to be a service provider for those in need of a service like that.
Yeah. And I love that you said the first version before you moved on to Vimeo was like
Oh,
good enough.
yes.
It was like
Yes.
good enough. It gets it out. Like even our first website, I think we used it for the first 2 years. It was like $5,000. It was so nimble, but it was good enough. And one day I always was like, I want to spend more money, but not at this time, to upgrade, to do things. And similar to you, you're like, this is good enough for now. One day when we have more funds and we can reinvest,
Yes.
we'll take it to that next stage. And I think it's just, again, I'm highlighting like how you were so good at just taking one step in front of the other. And it didn't stop you. You weren't like, no, until I get the right funds and go on Vimeo, I'm not going to start. It's like, no, you put it out there and you continue to iterate. And I'm sure even to this day, you still think that way. So
Completely. Your IP, like you always have to think, what's the one thing that is me that cannot be replicated? Hone in on that, nail that. A lot of other things are just beautification.
yeah,
And so, and beautification requires money.
yeah.
And so, you can get there. You can get there on those things. So don't even stress about that. Focus on the things that money's not going to do anything with. And it's going to be your intelligence and perspective that will shapeshift the product.
I love that. That's so, so profound. And okay, so you're doing this email chain, you're seeing friends of friends coming, people that you don't know, there's momentum. And I think it was, if I listened to another interview correctly, like one of your friends told you like, Hilary, this could be a thing. Tell me
Yes.
more about like when you shifted, like, all right, I've kind of made it and I'm ready to take that step and to leave that stable job, even though toxic, but it was still paying the bills, to move on to this new thing.
What I think happened was my time was officially spread so thin that I was unable to be my best self in two arenas at once. And so I had to decide which arena needed me most. And so that was one, deciding where I wanted to spend my time. I also had taken one last job in finance. I went into a consulting role at Oaktree Capital Management. Absolutely loved that job, worked with extremely wonderful people. And I could say that even in such an encouraging and supportive environment, I still wanted to build Soto. So that was a choice. It took me 8 months to get there from side hustle to full-time job. But just like with anything, there was a timeline put on that moment too. If in a year Soto didn't really experience growth, I would go back to the corporate world and find another job. But that's why leaving on really good terms is very important. I left on wonderful terms with both Goldman and Oak Tree. So, and that took effort and energy. And talk about giving 100% to two arenas. That's what you get for giving 100% to two places, is that you keep doors open. So that's why that effort does pay off. So, because a lot of people could say, like, why did you give 100% to that if you knew you were going to leave? Well, I didn't know how Soto was going to do. So I needed that opportunity to still be there for me, even if this failed.
Yes. And I love just circling back to how we started the conversation about writing down any fears or doubts. And so you were like, all right, if this doesn't work in a year, I will go and get another job. And I remember that gave me peace of mind too. And sometimes we forget that. It's like, we're all so young and starting, a business a little bit later in your career. It's like you have these relationships. You can even go back if this doesn't work. But the timeline you had there and that rationale, I'm sure, was very helpful because it seems a little less risky-ish.
Totally agree. Yeah. Any way you can mitigate risk, do it.
Exactly. Whatever you need to tell yourself, it's worth it. So I'm curious, early on, how are you building that awareness? So was it just purely word of mouth that it was growing? Were you doing social content? Like, how did you really grow that brand? Because that first year you gave yourself, you did, quite well, and you continue to have that momentum.
It was putting myself in situations where people could see Soto and I could control it. My social at the time was horrible. I mean, it existed for the sake of having it. My content itself was less than inspiring, but it got the job done. It was way more about sharing information. So I'm teaching here. These classes are new. It wasn't my voice and personality hadn't come through yet, but it was taking the time when anyone found Soto and fell in love with Soto, creating a relationship with them, treating them like the champion and VIP that they are, and making myself available to them so that I could learn what classes they loved and didn't love. And creating those champions, as I've said before, it's really not scalable. It takes the most amount of time and energy, but it will pay off the greatest dividends if you really do it correctly. So I didn't have to spend money on marketing because I spent my time with people who did the marketing for me. And to this day, it's the same way I'm building Soto right now. And I think a lot of companies are actually taking that same perspective in the way that they're building, and I'm really impressed by it. And a lot of the women who I look up to, that's how they're building their businesses. And it's really keeping a pulse on your end consumer and never losing sight that that is the person that fuels your business. So you are working in service of them. And what we did with in-person pop-ups was a combination of going to different cities, whether it was like Boston or Miami or Dallas or Nashville or Los Angeles, and doing these little hub workouts, bringing the community together in those areas, leveraging the network that I had there to share Soto with more people, using it as a cross-selling moment. So here's your in-person class. You can still take this class with you on the road via our app because I clearly don't live in Nashville. And so that really started to work well with building the community. And then I did one massive pop-up in the Hamptons the first summer I was doing Soto full time. And that was a real investment of both time, energy, and capital. But it ended up working out in a really wonderful way, which was I could take a concept and go from building demand, proving demand, to then really showing product market fit. And that's what June, July, and August represented for that pop-up in the Hamptons, was the path forward in doing that and replicating that. And I think that's the other thing. Anything you do, if you're looking to grow a sustainable company, can this be replicated? Mm-hmm. And if the answer is yes, then I could take this anywhere in the country, build demand that way, and grow the business from a really organic place.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate just how you were like boots on the ground. Yes. You yourself were like going and doing these different pops, doing it in person. Like you were a one-woman show, right? I mean, for that year?
Oh yeah. I was a one-woman show for about 2 years. It was really just me. Then at the end of 2023, I made my first full-time hire. I also brought on my first real full-time trainer. And then everything from there started to snowball and slowly building the team. So bringing on more contractors to help us build the infrastructure of the corporate side of the business, increasing our teachers so that we have a larger roster. And that was important because we needed to satisfy both the growing demand of in-person classes and the digital library. My body can only take so much. I needed to have other individuals who could lead classes. And one part of that growth story that I was really resolute in was I did not want to ever sacrifice quality for quantity of classes being offered. So I offered less classes during our pop-up in New York at the beginning of this year, and as opposed to overloading it with trainers who I didn't necessarily believe in. And what we ended up doing was we have always done very intentional teacher training searches and recruiting processes so that at the end of all those teacher trainings, we have the best trainers, in my opinion, in New York City. They are exquisite, from the way that they carry themselves in their personal life to the way that they lead in front of a classroom. We have really managed to find emblematic individuals who carry the ethos of Soto with them in their life. So it's not really a performance when they're teaching. It's just an extension of themselves. And the truth is they're also way better than me. So it's great. So I'm like, perfect. I hired someone better than me. Awesome. If I can keep doing that and replicating that, then we're going to build a really great business.
Yeah. And, that is quite a bit of growth. So you said like 2 years it was you. Third year, you really were building the team on the corporate side, hiring more instructors, and it really grew. And I'm sure there's so many things that might come up for you, but what were maybe some of the challenges that you face with really scaling this product, right? From your garage to then like really making it a real business. I'm sure there's so much there, but is there any few that come to mind?
Yeah. Codifying Soto and really figuring out like, how do I take what's been in my brain for years, put it on paper so that anyone could learn it. That process of the teacher training manual, devising what that program looks like, was a collaborative effort from our team. It was a combination of an incredible woman that works with us named Courtney Chung, to Danita Banks, who we worked with, to clearly my chief of staff, Samantha Michal, who's been integral in every facet of the business. So I say her last only because she does everything at Soto. So she also was involved in the teacher training and onboarding. And I think together with all of us, we really created the perfect first teacher training experience. And like everything, it's an iterative process. We ran our second teacher training, recruiting and training process this fall. We made it a little bit more streamlined, and we could already tell that the changes that we made, we already had shortened the runway for what it was going to take for those trainers to be up and ready to teach their first class. So our goal is, with every teacher training, get better, get smarter, get faster, so that we can get these incredible men and women out there ready to teach.
I love that. And I remember there's something that you said that stood out in my brain about, I don't know when it was, maybe it was the early days of Soto, where you said there was 1 month, I think it was like a December, that you got 0 signups.
Oh yeah, the first year.
Was that the first year? So tell me more, because that's so real. Like, what did that make you feel? What did that do? Did it shift your mentality in any way? Like, I'd love to hear that, because I'm sure there's people listening in today who are like, it's December and it's a little bit slow for me right now, but I'd love to unpack that a bit.
All businesses have inherent cyclicality to them. And for fitness, it's a very cyclical business, in the sense where you are going to be super top of mind for a few months of the year, and then you're going to be the last thing on people's agenda for other months of the year. So you have to be mindful of when you're trying to share your message with the world, and is it going to be well received? December, back in my first year, was a very quiet month, because it's kind of like the last hurrah. We've all done it. Parties, eating, drinking, movement is not taking priority, but that quickly shifts come January 1st. So all of a sudden, the message that you were sharing for December becomes well received 30 days later. And so what I did was, I acknowledged the cyclicality. I didn't let doubt overrun my brain. Instead, I said to myself, how can I make January 1st really successful, because December is clearly not going to be. And it was just rechanneling energy and in this concept of being patient. I think that a lot of times people think, well, patience and being passive can be sometimes synonymous, which is not the case. With patience, you can still be quite active. So that's what I chose to do. Like, how can I be active with this time? But even crazier, then another year of Soto goes by, and you realize that December can actually be a great month for fitness if you change the messaging. So that's where this concept of Black Friday and holiday sales, I would be remiss if I didn't say it matters. If you're running a promo during the holiday season, you're going to see success if you do it correctly. And so what I did was, it was really changing the messaging. And I did this exercise with a friend once who knew the guys at Warby Parker really well. And this is just an example, but when you think about your brand, you think about what values you ascribe to your brand, it's important to have those names listed or those traits listed. But it's not just the traits that make your company what it is. It's also then ordering them, like what comes first, what comes second. And so when you think about different companies, there's going to be value, customer service, the results orientation of that product. And so when I think about Soto, like we're definitely a results focused company first. I would say you're not coming to me for price. We are a more expensive product. I'm going to lead always with saying that we're going to deliver real strength, real endurance, whatever you're looking for, mental fortitude. We're going to do it. My first line isn't going to be, we're a steal. That's not how I pitch Soto. However, for 1 month of the year, for Black Friday, I will change that. I will actually say, you know what, for the next 30 days, we're still the most results-oriented platform on the market, in my opinion. But for the next 30 days, we're also a really good value. I take it back. We're always a good value. But if you are price sensitive, now is the time to sign up. And so I changed the messaging of how I pitch Soto. You come January 1st, that promotion clearly has to live for a certain window. And all of a sudden, now the message of Soto is, okay, yes, you're not going to get half off our annual membership, but if you're after real results and you're committed and you want to make the investment in yourself, there is no greater value than SotoMethod. And all of a sudden, the pitch has changed. So you just have to be mindful that you're going to experience bouts of silence, of no growth. Think about how you can change your messaging so that it's received by the end audience, whatever time of the year it is. And that's what I've had to get better at and learn and iterate with.
Yeah. And also like a subscription business is also very unique. Like I would imagine price sensitive people come in and like you said, for you, it's really the driven result. You're a more higher end product, but what you give is very differentiated compared to, your competitors. So I would imagine there are some people who are like, all right, I don't know if I can afford this or if I want to keep it, but maybe you can share some insights of running a subscription business because it is a little bit different in terms of like growth and how you evaluate things. And that's coming from someone who also has a subscription business. So I always find it interesting.
Subscription services are the greatest thing in the entire world, and they're also the most fickle. You really have to be offering something distinguished and different in order to survive. And it's interesting. So what I should have said in that last conversation was there's a difference between price and value. Price is what something costs. Value is the meaning you ascribe to it. So I think what we have really done is we've ascribed a lot of value to our product. And one of the reasons why we do have a slightly more expensive price on a month by month basis for the subscription service is we are not a set it and forget it business. I do not want you to subscribe to Soto. I don't want to charge you month over month and you not use it. Instead, I would much prefer that you try us for a month, you spend the money, and then you realize, you know what? I'm not really using it as much as I want to. Hence, the value isn't worth it to me. I want to cancel. Because what ends up happening is if you end up getting Soto and you're using it, and you're paying $39.99 a month for it, all of a sudden you're like, this is worth my money. And I've gotten you to actually think about taking Soto classes more often because you want to get the full value of what you're spending. And so now I've created a champion because you've ascribed value to the product. You're using it consistently. You're seeing results. And now you become the greatest voice for this brand. Mm-hmm. But sometimes that means putting a higher value on it so that people really think about it. And they think about using it. And I can tell you that right now in my life, when I spend money on anything that's really nice, I'm going to reach for it more than the other things that I spent because I want to get my cost per wear down, or I really want to maximize the value in which I ascribe to that item the first day I bought it. And so that's how I think about subscription services. I also think that getting to know your audience and what they prioritize from that subscription service. We are a higher dollar valued product. And what that means is I got to make sure I'm putting out fresh content every Sunday night. Not one video, not two videos, not three videos, but something in the range of 4 to 6. That's what you get with Soto. You're going to get fresh content all the time because I know you're using it so consistently.
I love that. And I know you have this saying, I know we're kind of coming up on time, so I want to hit a few other things where you say, control your controllables. And I'm curious to just get your perspective on that, whether it's your journey with motherhood, your journey building Soto, like how has that really helped you in this life that you've built for yourself?
Ownership is so critical when you want to be excellent in anything that you do. And I heard this on a recent podcast. I think it was Patrick O'Shaughnessy who said it, or Tim Ferriss, one of the two. And a lot of people will pivot out of finance and do something in the health and wellness space because they want balance. And that's not the case, actually. It's not necessarily true. Or people will pivot out of working at a hedge fund to work for themselves and manage their own portfolio. And sometimes people will ask, like, are you less stressed? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
And everyone is saying, like, why would you make that pivot then if that's the case? Well, some people pivot because they want balance and they want quality of life. Other people pivot because they want to win. And for me, I pivoted because I want to win. And I think I stand a better chance of winning in this arena, knowing what I'm great at and what I'm terrible at, and being able to build something in response to who I am and what I can bring to the world. And so with that all being said, controlling my controllables as it relates to business, I can control my attitude. I can control the energy of my classes. I can control who I bring into my space and my partners. And so I'm always going to make sure that those are the things I hit the nail on the head every single day. I can't control what happens with the economy. I can't control what happens with varying personalities of clients in my team. Yes, I can create environments to encourage people to be them best selves, but I can't control if you had a terrible day at home or at the office and you're coming into class. It's my job to hopefully turn that around. But if you do control the environment you're creating for other people, you'll stand a better chance of creating a space where people meet you where you are. And so that's what's been great about Soto is I think that we have done such a great job as a team creating a community that inspires excellence and ownership and accountability, that when people enter it, they bring that with us. But that took a lot of time and intention to build it. And as it relates to my personal life, I mean, getting pregnant was the hardest thing I've ever gone through because I could not control it. It was completely outside of my control. It destroyed me. And what I focused on during that time was, again, strength and attitude. Couldn't get pregnant, but I could get stronger every day. And while it took a lot more effort to find time to work out when I was that sad, I was always happy that I did it because I ended the day a little bit stronger physically and mentally than I started. And making that choice for over 365 days meant that when I finally was willing to ask for help, work with a fertility specialist, and finally get pregnant, I actually started my pregnancy at my strongest I've ever been.
That's amazing.
And if I had not controlled what I could control for the previous year and a half, I don't know if I would have felt as good throughout this pregnancy with or without it. And so maintaining a mindset of not if, but when really helps you push through those moments of silence or when you really need to be patient. But instead of being patient and being idle, being patient and being active.
I love that. That's so powerful, whether it's like your fertility journey or going through anything hard in life, business, personally, professionally. And like you said, it's so easy just to be idle and not be proactive. But I love the fact that you are still making yourself stronger every day. And it's like you have this ownership and control over something and it makes you feel good. And this is me just reiterating because I feel like since I started the business, the one thing that has dropped, and I'm in the world of wellness, is movement. Like I've done everything else, the stress, I'm still unwinding from the finance life.
Yeah.
Now there's different stressors, right? It's like a different, caliber of stress, but like the movement piece, the eating piece is now there, the sleep, the managing stress, like all this stuff, but movement is still something that, I have not, been as consistent with. And I've done so many interviews, hundreds of women. I have so many friends in the space of entrepreneurship now. And I'm like, one thing that they keep consistent, similar to you, is that movement piece, right? Because it's like their life can be so unpredictable. We all go through life stuff. So it's just very inspiring to hear, your journey, making yourself stronger. When you got pregnant, you're the strongest you've ever been. And I'm sure it's been a great outlet for you, even building this business. So I'm just super inspired by it all. And I need to hear it.
No. And by the way, you've gotten all the other pillars down. You're in a great position. I'm not that good.
We all got to pick and choose.
For sure.
But no, that's helpful. Well, Hilary, it was such an honor to have you on. And maybe I'll kind of close on this one last question. We've mentioned a lot of this throughout the podcast, but what do you think a lot of people get wrong about starting a business or entrepreneurship that you see?
I think what they get wrong is that it needs to be perfect when you bring it to the world. And taking action is so much more important than being perfect.
Yeah.
And I've learned that primarily from my husband, who has this whole expression, which is today, not tomorrow. And that's how he leads his business. And that's how he inspires his employees. And I would say, what can you get done today? What should not wait for tomorrow? And the thing that will kill your business the most is procrastination. And so you just have to be very willing to do the hard thing every single day so that the business moves forward. But don't forget that putting stuff out into the world gives you an opportunity to get feedback. And that feedback allows you to create a better product. And that better product will then attract a bigger consumer. So the sooner you can put something out there, the faster you can get feedback, the faster you can grow your business. So just don't let the fear of something not being the reflection of what you have in your brain stop you from putting it out. Because Soto, I only just in the last week finally have a space that is exactly what I had in my brain for Soto for the last 3 or 4 years.
Amazing.
So if I had I would never have gotten to this point if I hadn't put out my initial product, which was a class under an avocado tree with the shittiest mats you've ever seen and the worst weights. Like, we never would have gotten to the realization of what Soto has been in my brain, but that didn't stop people from loving it. So take action is my number one piece of advice.
So strong, Hilary. This was such a blast interviewing. I'm like so inspired by your journey. I know so many people listening, you make it feel very approachable. And I think you live that truth of like putting it out there, not waiting for tomorrow. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I think so many people need that reminder. So,
and you can do it. Oh, of course. And you really can do it. It's okay also to say you want to do something and then realize, it's not for me. That's an also very, very okay path. But just give yourself the option to love it or to not love it.
I love it. Well, Hilary, thank you for joining us. This was so fun. I could have talked to you for hours. Loved it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. It was such a delight, sincerely.